Welcome to Caribbean Tea. From St. Vincent, Kendall Morgan. In Georgetown, Guyana, Dennis Cabral. And I am Vivian Williams in New York. Gangs and governance, the Caribbean's crime crisis. This is Caribbean Tea, the podcast where we stir the pot on the region's most pressing issues, social, legal, cultural, and political, with unflinching honesty and thoughtful analysis. Today we are diving into a crisis that's gripping the region from Port-au-Prince to Port-of-Spain. One that threatens not just lives, but the very institutions meant to protect them. On this episode, Guns, Gangs, and Governance, the Caribbean's crime crisis, we take a hard look at the region's escalating violence, the flood of illegal firearms, and the troubling erosion of public trust in law enforcement and governance. Joining us are three heavyweights in Caribbean security and public policy. Paul Slow, retired Assistant Commissioner of Police in Guyana. Professor Ivelaw Griffith, security expert and scholar of Caribbean security and political affairs. And Gary Griffith, former Commissioner of Police in Trinidad and Tobago. Together, they unpack the roots of the region's institutional weaknesses, discuss policy responses, and confront hard truths about political will, corruption, and the influence of organized crime. With murder rates among the highest in the world and illegal weapons pouring in from across borders, is the Caribbean losing control of its own security? This is Caribbean Tea. Let's begin.
I think one of the things that our politicians are realizing is that they need to be maybe a bit more forthcoming when it comes to dealing with the public expectations with regard to the handling of crime which has been escalating right through the Caribbean. I think in the campaign in the recent general elections in Trinidad and Tobago, a comment surfaced that has sparked some interest in the region. And I'd like to ask Vivian to play a clip from the campaign and perhaps ask former Commissioner Griffith to begin the response to it.
And so extraordinary times, in my respectful view, calls for extraordinary measures. And this is one that I call for open discussion on, for us to find the parameters within which we can have citizens given a right to arm themselves against the bandits.
When you vote for the UNC, we will give you stand your ground laws, home invasion laws, and legal firearms. And when the brutal rapists and criminals come into your homes, I tell you again, load up your matic, light them up, empty the clip. And when you're done, knock it on them, knock it again, and then call my name. I am Kamla. Do not fear. Kamla is here.
Would that be something you'd advocate, former Commissioner Griffith and former Assistant Commissioner Slow?
Oh, you're gonna love that lady. She's a perfect politician. It is the ideal political thing for everyone who is fearful of crime to hear something like that. So that's the political thing to say before you get into government. When she gets into government, I was her right hand. I was a national security advisor for 3 years. I was a minister of national security for 2 years. She has a lot of passion. I can assure you that what she said there, it is not going to happen. There's no way. She is going to be logical. That is absolutely impractical for us to go down that road. I opened that Pandora's box with firearms. I don't know how it is in other parts in the Caribbean, but before Gary Griffith, so a law-abiding person getting a firearm, you had to either bribe somebody, you had to have serious contacts in the hierarchy of the government to get a firearm. It was ridiculous. It was about 200 firearms issued per annum, and you had 35,000 applicants. It was unbelievable. What I did is, and then because of that, it caused bribery, it caused corruption, it caused persons who needed it, they did not get it, they were killed, persons were raped, kidnapped, and so forth. I was able to bring it to 1,000 per annum from 200, 1,000 civilians and 1,000 law enforcement officials. So still it would have taken me 35 years. We can't go more than 1,000 per annum. That's 3 per day in a country like 1.4 million. You have to do meticulous background check, due diligence, liaison with the spouse, checking the finances, looking at the individual, seeing if he's an alcoholic, seeing it, if it is that he has the competence to, and the responsibility to carry a firearm. Anytime you start going more than 3 per day, you're going to water down and diminish the due diligence, which makes it now you turn from giving people the right to now the wrong person using it to shoot their wife, having a negligent discharge, finding it in a nightclub, losing it, and a criminal will get it, or you being a criminal yourself. So her concept, it has to be tempered. It cannot be that we turn into something like North America, where it's easier to get a firearm than it is to buy a doubles in Trinidad and Tobago on a Saturday morning. You can't go down that road. You have to be balanced. So we had a previous government in Trinidad and Tobago that agreed with that nonsense. Don't give to anyone, which was unacceptable. We can't get to that concept of being fearful of firearms where every criminal seems to have one in the Caribbean. But we can't go to the Kamala's concept of give everyone a firearm if they have a certificate of character, because many persons are questionable and will have a certificate of character because they were never held. So we have to be very controlled in how that is done. It must not be used, well, it was used as an avenue to win an election. Now that she's in government, it is hoped that she can have people around her that can advise her accordingly. Let us not turn the Caribbean into something like North America.
Let me jump in here, yes, Kendall. You know, the stats will show that in the countries in the Caribbean and even farther afield, licensed firearms, well, firearms in the old, Guyana is right up there in terms of firearms per capita. We have every Tom, Dick, and Barry with firearms. And there is no doubt, we know that from the evidence, we know that from investigation, we know that from interacting with people. The system has become very, very corrupt. People have said, prominent people, if you want a firearm, the going price in Guyana was $1.5 million, depending on the type, whether you wanted a pistol, whether you wanted a, even with the pistols, whether it's a 3.2 or a 9mm or a 45, whether you want an assault rifle. The system, and I used to be a firearms instructor. I have the privilege of I have represented Guyana in rifle shooting. I have represented the West Indies in rifle shooting. So I know something about guns and all of that. The biggest problem I see with terms of firearm is, one, the way how it is acquired, no proper background check and so on. We have criminal elements who have firearm. Only recently, a man by the name of Gali Khan, who is a deportee from the U.S., criminal, served time in Guyana for criminal behavior, sent back to Guyana. He is senior in a security company. He's a licensed firearm holder. Unfortunately, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he killed his wife. He killed his better half with the same firearm. So no proper control. And then what is also very, very worrying, and I have made this point over and over based on my experience as a firearm instructor, a lot of these people, I would say like about 90 to 95% of the people, including police, including the military, including the security walking around, they don't know how to use the firearm properly. It is evident. And I have tested people with this. Ask them not only how to use in terms of point and shoot, but as we say, when you may legally fire. People don't know. And what happens then? What happens then? In many cases, people are in a situation where they can legally shoot, but because of the lack of knowledge, they choose not to use because, again, Guyana has this archaic thing. So even if, as the now Prime Minister said, you want to light up someone who comes into your home. People are afraid because the police are going to hold you for some period and lock you up, take your firearm, and then a slow process to investigate before eventually they might say, well, look, take back the firearm. But it is a worrying thing. And I have said repeatedly, if arming people, just arming people was the solution to crime, then in many places, America in particular, you wouldn't have had crimes. Guyana would have been close behind because so many people have firearms. And if you're saying that firearms is the solution to crime, then you follow the logic. So it is a thing. I agree that people, legitimate businessmen and others, should be issued with firearm. But I am saying that they have to be properly trained. You have to go through some process to make sure they are properly trained, check the temperament and all of that. You can't just put a firearm, an instrument that is designed to kill, in the hands of someone who really and truly doesn't have the temperament to act properly with that firearm.
Before Professor Griffith comes in, let me read this quote. Our world is more interdependent than ever. Borders have become more like nets than walls. And while this means that wealth, ideas, information, and talent can move freely around the globe, so can the negative forces shaping our shared fates. The financial crisis that started in the US and swept the globe was further proof that for better and for worse, we can't escape one another. That's a quote from former US President Bill Clinton, and it's one of the many quotes in Professor Griffith's book, Challenge Sovereignty, a recent work from Professor Griffith. When we think of the proliferation of guns in Caribbean states, we must consider how the abundance of guns in one state may find its way in other states in the Caribbean, creating negative consequences in neighboring states.
Yep, thank you. Bill Clinton's quote is in the first chapter. And partly because of the global interdependence about which Clinton was speaking, which is reflected in Challenge Sovereignty, I worry about the statement by now Prime Minister Kamla Bissessor. I'm delighted to hear former Commissioner Griffith say that, yes, platitudes before election will not likely become policy after election. But here's a worry that I want to share. If you were to do a survey of every jurisdiction of the Caribbean, including Trinidad and Tobago, including Guyana, the major worry is not about the legal guns used for homicides or other crimes. The major worry is about illegal weapons trafficked. And so my worry about that blanket statement to gather votes is that it's going to fuel and just give justification to the people who are part of the illegal arms trafficking business. The Prime Minister said, light them up. I got something you can get to light them up. So I worry about the experience of making a statement with so powerful a set of implications, not in regard solely to the legal firearm regime. And I agree with both Gary and Paul that there is a lot to be said for improving. But I worry about the growing illegal trafficking of firearms. Yesterday, I spoke at an OAS committee for the Caribbean on security. That issue came up again, the profusion of illegal weapons. So my worry is that Small Arms Survey did a project with CARICOM Impacts 2 years ago. I was in Barbados for the unveiling of that report. Including in Trinidad, I haven't heard of a report in Ghana yet. Guns made by printers as part of the legal access. So my worry is about the legal set of weapons, not so much the legal ones. And I'm hoping that this former Commissioner Griffith is correct, that we wouldn't see a movement from those set of platitudes to a practice that says, let's open up and let's light them up.
I just wanted to get a sense from Mr. Griffith and Mr. Slow, whether how does one, particularly Mr. Griffith, because you've worked in a political environment, how does one now go back to the electorate and say that the promise we made to you we really can't fulfill it. And then what does that mean for the overall stability of a country where there is a broken promise and perhaps there is an increase in crime? Do we now look at a situation where overall crime gets out of hand? And going back to the point of what Professor Griffith talked about, the eventual proliferation of more weapons, more illegal guns in the system. That's one element. And two, how does one guard against the increase in the number of legal weapons getting into the hands of the wrong people and therefore becoming illegal weapons?
Sure. That's easy. The good thing is, after being a politician, I understood whether you say tomato and you change it to tomato, we tell the public, oh, it's the same thing. That's what's going to happen. She's going to say, listen, I said for all law-abiding citizens, I did, and the law-abiding citizen means based on a very stringent, she's going to come back to the same thing that I did. She's not going to turn it around and say, you just need a certificate of character. You can just go in the shop, show an ID card and buy one. She's going to say, remember I said law-abiding citizen. When I said that, it was in reference to what Griffith was doing as commissioner, stringent testing, psychometric testing, background checks. You have your spouse, who needs to sign to give approval. You need to check the finances. We need to analyze if it is that you have any problems with your mental health and so forth. So she's going to shift the goalpost slightly to see, well, that's what I said, because she did say law-abiding citizens. So the initial concept was, if I didn't commit a crime, I could get a firearm. She's going to shift the goalpost, but give justification to say just that if we allow too many to go out, the wrong persons could get it in their hands, and then it can become a problem. Going back to the professor's comment about illegal firearms, I just want to quickly add that, again, when I liaised with the US, they have stated that over 95% of illegal firearms that enter our country, Trinidad and Tobago, come from the legal ports of entry. Legal ports of entry. This perception that all these illegal weapons come from Venezuela. The weapons we get from Venezuela are muskets. The sophisticated high-end artillery that you get come from North American containers. We lose about 7 containers annually, which is why I made the recommendation to the president, the new prime minister, about splitting national security into Home Affairs and Ministry of Defense, putting a specific to deal with border protection. We need to do the same throughout CARICOM, but we need to improve impacts, the RSS, and have that proper sharing of information. That is where the problem lies. England, the United Kingdom that's an island. They don't give out a weapon to any citizen because no weapons illegal criminals have. We need to do the same. The more we block our borders and prevent the illegal weapons from entering our islands, the less need there would be for law-abiding citizens to need a firearm. And that is the situation. We can't reach a point of North America where everybody must defend themselves. That's what Kamala did. She gave the throw-on lad, listen, we throw our hands in the air. We can't protect you, so you have to protect yourself. We can't reach that point. There must be a point where law-abiding citizens with enough justification can have a firearm, but it can't be for each and every one. As I said, if we put proper systems in our border protection regionally and nationally, there will be less need for us to have to give legal firearms to law-abiding citizens.
Mr. Slow, your take.
Yeah, well, Guyana is in a unique situation with respect to that because we have land borders with Brazil, and Brazil is a major manufacturer of firearms. We have border with Venezuela as well. So, and we have lax enforcement in those areas. So we get firearms coming from North America through containers and barrels, and we also get illegal firearms coming via over the border. Many times during the dry season, you can just walk across from Brazil, cross the Iring River and just walk across and bring across firearms. And given the vastness of our interior in particular, you have lots and lots of illegal firearms coming in. And the point was made earlier too, that when you give the wrong people firearms, those firearms that are given legally, quote unquote legally, many of them fall into the hands of the wrong person. And then we have this phenomena really, a proliferation of private security companies, heavily armed, not properly trained. All of those are things. I know you have people in some of these private security companies with criminal records. And I'm not talking about any assault, I'm talking about people who are convicted for robbery and other serious offenses. They are in the company and they get a firearm to go and work. And the suspicion is many times they use those firearms for nefarious purposes. So it's something that has to be addressed very holistically. Yes, law-abiding citizens need to go through a proper system to make sure that they are given permission to own and use a firearm, but at the same time, we have to make sure that that comprehensive background check is there. We have had cases where 18-year-old, 19-year-old people are issued with firearm license. We had a case, Dennis knows about it, the man who shot his wife 12 times at Diamond about 2 months ago. Some domestic thing. Clearly, a proper check would have resulted in him not getting a firearm, or at some stage the thing being taken away from him. Clearly, the man that I referenced earlier, Gali Khan, his lawyer is saying that the man had 3 or 4 attempts to commit suicide before he finally killed his wife. Why is such a person in possession of a firearm? A man who attempts to commit suicide is still allowed to keep a firearm. So the whole system has to be looked at in a very holistic manner.
Moving along, Trinidad and Tobago Senior Counsel Martin Daly touched on what we are talking about. Let's hear from him and then get some responses.
The police service has failed, and it is failing for many reasons. And if they want something useful to do, they must get together and agree on a complete overhaul of how the police service is established constitutionally and who is responsible constitutionally for discipline, promotion, hiring, discipline, promotions, and transfers in the police service, because the existing constitutional machinery has failed. All these other highfalutin things about firearms, licenses, and all these different things are of no consequence.
Reactions?
Fully agree.
But as it hit home to Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, the comment he made again, that would have been probably within the last year. As I said, public trust and confidence in the police service is now 8%. They started using red herrings with firearms. We had the same situation that Paul is speaking about. Ulla Christopher was missing in action for several months. She didn't want to approach the media. But these were the same police officers that just 3 years ago, public trust and confidence was 59%. So it is not the officers. It has to do again with leadership. So what Martin Daly is speaking about is a cop-out. It is an excuse to justify the police service not having the public trust as they should. But 3 years ago, it was the same 7,000 police officers by and large. So it has to do with the difference in leadership. And this is not just of the Commissioner of Police at the time. At the time, Minister Stuart Young was the Minister of National Security, and he provided the type of support that I required. Now, then when we move to what Martin Daly is speaking about, Minister Fitzgerald Hines was probably seen as the worst minister in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. Ulla Christopher likewise. So let us not knock the service and knock the Constitution. We will have all shortcomings in the Constitution. We are young countries in CARICOM still, virtually young. We are going to make mistakes because of our Constitution. But we have to make most of what it has. And if it is we make most of it, we will be able to lift the standard. As I will again sum it, 14% in 2018 was public trust. 2021 was 59%. Now 2024, just until early this year, 2025 was 8%. That has to do with leadership, not the Constitution as stated by Martin Daly, but leadership.
Yeah, Guyana might be a different case because I was the chairman of the Police Service Commission in Guyana, 2018 to 2021. The Service Commission, unlike in Trinidad, the Police Service Commission is responsible, among other things, for promoting and disciplining ranks from inspector all the way to assistant commissioner. And one of the problems you have there, the Constitution says that you can promote and you can discipline. Yeah, you can discipline, but then you do not have the resources to discipline. Yeah, you can promote, no problem there. But when it comes to disciplining officers, if you're to have an inquiry into an allegation, because remember, there's a presumption of innocence guaranteed under the Constitution. The Constitution does not allow the Police Service Commission the independence and the resources to make sure that they can do a proper investigation into any allegation of breach. So what happens? There's a provision in the Constitution Guyana's Constitution, where the Service Commission in relation to disciplinary matters can delegate the authority to ranks in the police force. And that has been proven to be wholly unworkable, because when you delegate to the ranks to investigate and perhaps even set up an inquiry or a tribunal, they don't do, it's a body thing. So therein lies the problem. So at least that one aspect ought to be addressed, where the Service Commission should have the wherewithal to conduct investigations and to discipline ranks that they promote.
Professor Griffith, you have been looking at this in a holistic way. I'm sure you have a view whether constitutional mechanisms which have colonial roots are working for modern Caribbean societies.
Well, I think Gary Griffith referred to the fact that Caribbean nations, and I'm thinking of the Anglophone Caribbean nations, are in the infancy or the teenagehood of their nationhood. And in the context of that recency of independence, one would expect the necessity over time to modify constitutions. But I want to recommend that constitutions by themselves, reforming them while it may be necessary, is not sufficient. You can modify the structure as much as you want, but when you have to ask the question, some of which has been asked before, what are the functional elements that would support the Constitution's reform? If you don't have the leadership that goes to make the structure in the reformed Constitution functional, still have a problem. If you don't have the training to bolster the capabilities and the competence, you have a problem. If you don't have, in the context of modern day, the technology. So I want to recommend that while Mr. Daly's recommendation to reform the Constitution may be necessary, it's not sufficient. But you also have, in the context of functionality, to pay attention to some of the political leaders. You know, I was struck, and I'm sure Mr. Paul Sloan and Dennis would also have been struck. A government minister in a public statement recorded, and I'm in the diaspora and I'm getting it, telling people if you want to dispose of your firearms, throw it over the police, throw it in the police compound. What guidance is a minister of the government telling citizens, you got a weapon, you don't want to turn it back to the police, throw it over the police, the defense. A minister telling people to shoot and scoot. So you got to ask the question, is the structure modification only that's needed for attention? No. Got to look at the leadership. You got to look at the competence. You got to look at the training. You got to look at the technology. You got to look at the personalities on the political side who are there giving guidance to the people in the professional domain. Modifying the Constitution may be necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Do you believe that over the years, since our periods of independence, that somehow the law enforcement agencies have become too cozy with the societies, therefore making it very difficult for the enforcement of laws across political and other interest lines?
For me, it's a delicate balance. You want to whether you're in the police force, especially if you're in the police force. There was a time when Guyana had its national service. You want to strike a balance between being rigid, disciplinary, and authoritarian, and being engaged with the public. But that is a balance that's going to be there irrespective of what a political directorate is. And so it will take the sensitivity and the leadership ability of the people who are the professional heads of the police or the army to walk that thin line, that balance between being too cozy with and being too aloof from.
I think it's just the opposite. We still have colonial laws that were actually drafted in the 30s and 40s to control the masses. So, and it's hypocritical. We have things such as lewd behavior, but then Carnival Monday and Tuesday turn a blind eye. We have things called loitering, where if police officers see two young boys in a corner, you could arrest them for loitering. We have situations where, again, in New York City, you could shout and argue with a police officer all you want. You can't touch them, and you must listen to them. In Trinidad and Tobago, I think throughout the Caribbean, if you argue with a police officer, there are different words and how the charge is made. You can't shout at or you can't argue with a police officer. So those laws must be changed. These were laws that were drafted to suppress persons. If you have things such as body cameras and so forth, you don't need to have to resort to those type of laws. I think we need to amend certain laws. Because the reason I say that, it has been abused. My son got a gun to his head on a beach because a police officer just thought he was big and bad. And then when he found out it was Griffith's son, he starts backpedaling. It shouldn't have to reach because it's Griffith's son. We have so many situations with police officers abusing their authority because of improper training and no consequences. Paul spoke about giving the authority to the Service Commission. We have a police complaint authority that is a toothless bulldog, and they take reports, they give the recommendations to the Professional Standards Bureau, who comprise police officers who will now probably end the case because there is a batch of another police officer. So I think we need to probably carefully analyze that. Too many laws have allowed police officers to abuse their authority. One of the things that caused public trust, and even myself as a commissioner, it was 79%. It was because of even though I was hard and tough with one shot, one kill, and so forth. If at any time a police officer will abuse his authority, immediately it's suspension or dismissal. And we have to ensure that at no time it must ever be perceived that police officers feel that they're above the law. So there are certain laws I think that must be looked at and must be removed because they were colonial laws that were made specifically to suppress the population.
Yeah, like abusive language and all those type of things. So even though you have a right, constitutional right, then you're going to be charged for abusive language. And well, in Guyana too, you have the thing about cybercrime and all of that type of thing. So yeah, some of these things have to be changed, I agree. But you know, coming back to the colonial time, again, we say you have to have this balance. Because I recall back in the day, even long after the colonial times, when you graduated from the police training school, as it then was, you were never sent back to the area that you came from immediately, because it was felt that it might have been difficult for you to go and effectively police an area that you grew up, you have your relatives and all of those people there. So you were sent elsewhere, and after a period of time, then maybe you might be rotated back to that area. But what has happened in recent times, and recent here being from the 90s coming back, men are recruited and they are sent because of, I guess because of the shortage, they're recruited and they're sent right back into the community from which they came. And we have found, we call it inbreeding. You have that inbreeding. People are unable to perform their functions as they should. Because if their cousin or somebody they went to school with, or a sister or a brother commits themselves, then the lax action is taken. And that leads to a situation where the villagers and the people in the community start to lack confidence, because you're going to arrest someone for some offense, and then the same offense is committed by someone who's known to you, and you don't do anything. And that brings a problem. So that is a balance that we have to make sure we create. And again, back in the day, I say that what happened? You had facilities, so you could afford it. You could have afforded to transfer someone to some other area because you had facilities there for that person. But now you don't have that, and that causes a big problem, because what you have now, what we call 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 policemen. So when you finish working your shift, you're gone to wherever you live. Whereas in the past, a lot of policemen stayed in the back room, so that when there was an emergency, it's not only people who are actually on duty, but the person in charge of the shift could have gone upstairs and said, look, we are come, we got an emergency, and people were there to respond. And all of those things have gone through the window now, and that is the problem. So you have many stations and outposts, 2 or 3 people on duty at the time. That's the extent of the manpower at the station. Now, how do they respond properly to any given situation?
That has taken us into the fabric of the societies in which we live. That's another interesting area for discussion. So let's talk about the nature of the society and how it impacts crime and institutions. Let's listen to this recording.
Gangs have been enshrined in the consciousness of communities. The gangs play a very strategic role when it comes to distribution of wealth in our communities. And a lot of our communities have felt neglected for a very long time from government. So they're not getting the jobs from government. They're not getting the kind of resources they want from the government. But somehow the gangs seem to be the government in our communities. And in Trinidad and Tobago, they don't call themselves gangs. They see themselves more as community groups, more as organizations, more as community leaders. These are the leaders of the community who are receiving these contracts from government to provide the kind of jobs. It could be payback for getting the votes as well. They see themselves as business organization, and that business can run from government contracts to drugs. It's whatever is the big business on the street today, and they're going to get involved in that. No business passes them by.
Fighting with each other over state contracts has continued to be a major problem. They put hits to use, and they use the profit from the contracts to put hits on other persons, to buy more weapons, to use it as a front for drug blocks, to purchase more drugs. Presently, intelligence has revealed the gangs who have the state contracts. We have names, we have companies, who they use as fronts, the type of contracts, and where they're getting it, and the cost.
Well, that about sums it up. I mean, I don't know if it is as bad as in other Caribbean countries, but we have been sleeping with the devil, and there's always going to be a price to pay. I stood firm against two governments. My own, as Minister of National Security, there was something known as life sport, where 400 million TT, we are speaking about nearly 60 million US was given for sport. I wish that could be done for sport in Trinidad and Tobago every year to help our national sporting teams. But it was, the bulk of that was given to criminal elements, and they use the same funds to purchase more weapons, hire more gang members, put hits on other gang members to get their state contracts, use the funds to purchase, to hire and contract rogue police officers. It's a lose-lose situation. I stood up against my own government with that. When I was Commissioner of Police, I stood up against the Prime Minister because he foolishly was trying to justify, well, they have not been charged, so nothing is wrong with giving them a contract. And I said, well, yeah, fine. Well, then that's just like saying if somebody is known as a terrorist by the CIA, you're not going to give him a contract to pay in the White House. We have to be very careful how we do that. But most governments since 2006 with Patrick Manning, he started referring to gang leaders as community leaders. And from then it was downhill. Listen, just 2000, in the year 2000 under Basdio Pandey, we had less than 100 murders per annum. Within 10 years, we got 6 times that amount. It had to do with this. Government doing exactly what Renee Cummins stated. She was spot on. They give the gangs massive contracts. Before the election, massive promises are given to give the state contracts to the gangs. They promise all of the gang members, and then there's a price to pay. And the contracts, it escalates the contracts. It becomes a byproduct towards further crime. It's a lose-lose situation, and it's a bad precedent that has taken place by all governments in Trinidad and Tobago. I fought against my own governments, both the PNM and the UNC. I said it is wrong. When you play with filthy animals, you're going to get fleas. I got 43 death threats on myself as commissioner doing that same type of interview. I look a little younger then, but nothing else has changed. The only thing has changed is the fact that government after government, they do it, and they continue to do it, and we pay a price.
We have a situation in Guyana where, yes, I don't think they want to refer to them as gangs, but we know people with criminal leanings who are being identified and given contracts and so on. People who are downright criminals for support because the government wants support, and they go into these communities and they identify these people, they give them contract. I don't think we have gotten to the stage yet. I hope we will never get there where perhaps they're putting hits on people and all of that, but they feel they have carte blanche, especially when it relates to drugs. They smuggle the drugs, they do what they want to do, and then in many cases, people are, when they are ill, they call some politician, and some politician will intervene, and that there goes it. We have had many cases, might be familiar with some of them, where people commit themselves, or even the police might put out wanted bulletin for certain people who are known criminals, and then what happened? It just dies. It dies down. It dies down all because of the political connection. And as Gary said, it's a case where they are playing with the puppy, as we say, and they're likely to be bitten by the fleas. But, politicians, they don't see that far. All they see is the immediacy. We want this to be done so that we can get votes, and that's it. But that is a very worrying and dangerous thing.
I think in all this, there is some good news. For me, the good news is that the gang infestation and the relationship between the gang and economics and political leadership is not a Caribbean-wide phenomenon. Yes, it's been a reality in Trinidad. I've got a chapter in this book that looks at the Trinidad 2011 state of emergency. Yes, it has been a significant reality in Jamaica. I can still remember seeing some of those signs. After Jesus come to us, the Tivoli Garden operation represented a failure of the state, and the substitute for the state became the posses. But I would hazard a conjecture that that is not a reality throughout the Caribbean. Gangs operation are significant challenges in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Trinidad. But you can, I was betting a journalist from Colombia a couple of weeks ago, and I'll bet Gary Griffith, if you can give me a list of 10 gangs in Dominica or in St. Lucia, they're going to give you $100 US. You know, sometimes the media makes this thing to be a massive infestation of the region. There are significant challenges in Trinidad, in Jamaica, significant challenges in Haiti, but this is not a region-wide phenomenon as the media sometimes, some media would try to make it out. When it's Trinidad or Jamaica, it is a manifestation of the limitations of the organized formal state to really take care of the social needs, to take care of the civic needs, to take care of the law enforcement needs. In Tivoli Gardens, the posses, the gangs took care of their civic justice. You rape a child, one of those operators, commanders, punish you. They didn't rely on the state. As a matter of fact, the state was persona non grata unless they got permission to go in there. So for me, there, you know, the glass is not half empty. The glass is half full in that the gang phenomenon, particularly with the nexus between economics and politics, is not a region-wide reality.
Professor Griffith, might it not be that though you may not have what fits formal definitions of gangs, what the clip refers to is criminal enterprise supported and facilitated by the government? You may not have gangs, but you may have economic enterprise that organize themselves as legitimate businesses that members of the community rely on for their livelihood. What's your thoughts on that?
Peter Tosh has a wonderful, among many wonderful tunes, a song called Equal Rights. And one of the things he asks rhetorically in that wonderful tune is a question that comes to the statement. He says, everybody wants to solve the crime, but tell me, who are the criminals? Sometimes the criminals are in the very law enforcement agency. Sometimes the criminals are in the formal business community. Sometimes the criminals are the politicians themselves. So yes, you've got, in many jurisdictions, including Guyana, nebulous operators who are walking outside the law, the legal formality, we can put in a category of being the criminals. So I certainly would accept that proposition.
Just a quick question, perhaps to former Commissioner Griffith. Are you saying that the payment to these groups, as may operate in some of the other countries and gangs in Trinidad and Jamaica, these payments should not be done, or that they should be better monitored? Because you hear governments saying that they see that as a social responsibility, where you have lots of youth unemployment, that they're financing these social programs to provide some sort of employment and an income stream to some of the people. Are you saying it should be cut or monitored?
Yeah, Mr. Williams, if I could, yeah, and that is a brilliant question. And this is where the problem lies. I met these gang leaders personally. Sometimes they will call me and say, arrest them, so that they could come and meet with me, and they will give me advice, and I would keep them under control. I was like the Wednesday, keeping the two gangs apart to stop the war from taking place. So I became the big brother, letting them know that I will arrest you if you break the law. And these gang leaders, as little as they were brilliant young men. When I say brilliant, for you to be able to influence hundreds of young men to believe in you, they had management ability, they had organizational structure. And my concept is use your skill and talent towards building your community rather than using it to kill young men because you want to be the don in the area and you want to make millions. If it is that they could utilize their strength and their leadership skill in the right manner, the communities could be transformed. But that is not what was happening. They will get a $10 million US contract to build some box trains that worth about $1 million US, and they will take that 9 million not to help the community, but to build themselves and use the profit to bring in illegal weapons, bring in more drugs, and use the profit as a byproduct to foster other illegal activities, pay off persons in the judiciary, in the police service, and so forth. And that was my problem. So the government must be very careful. And then likewise, a quick point here is that the government can't get things done. In Jamaica and Trinidad, for example, you can't fix a road in a certain area unless you hire certain persons because they will sabotage it, or workers will come and be threatened. So you have no choice. And then when I told the government, let the police go in, the money you have to pay the police was actually costing more than to pay the persons who are actually extorting you and telling you have to pay us to do the job. So it was madness that has been going on in Trinidad and Tobago. We have to find a common ground. The common ground cannot be just giving them the funds and hoping that they will adhere to the law. You have to make sure that the funding must be provided in such a way that it can help the community. It is given throughout to the young persons who need the jobs. And that has been the problem, where the problem that has existed in Trinidad and Tobago definitely is lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, lack of leadership skill, lack of mentorship. And these young men are easily influenced by characters who will utilize them in the wrong manner. It is something known as secondary crime prevention, taking all of the different qualities of a young man or woman and turn them away from a life of crime. Failure to do that turns them into gang members.
In the general context, we hear of cartels, and we think of them in the context of the drug trade. But cartel is a concept also familiar to the law in the context of antitrust, where entrepreneurs secure turfs. It seems to me from this conversation that there are criminal elements that are entering markets so that we have criminal conduct in economic enterprise. As Mr. Griffith points out, you must have proper monitoring of what is taking place. You don't just give the funds, say, this is a business enterprise, and not look at how the enterprise is operating. Let's listen now to this other recording.
To understand the murder rate, to understand the coup, and to understand all the complexities. You must understand the games the politicians have played. The reality is that the most powerful players who are resident in Trinidad in the illicit drug trade have then the need to purchase impunity from the state. They have to be political financiers. And that is what drives the endemic corruption of the society. When people speak of corruption in society, all they look at is the most visible means, the lower level ones, the ones who get caught taking a bribe and things like that. The traffickers who live in Trinidad and Tobago, they wield power within the state structure to the extent that nobody in the state structure can bring them down. They are in fact untouchable.
That is totally false. Well, again, I can speak for myself as Commissioner of Police and Minister of National Security. As Commissioner of Police, I was able to launch investigations. Even a minister was actually charged under my watch as a Commissioner of Police. So the perception that the criminal underworld and organized crime is so powerful that no one can touch them. Total nonsense. Total nonsense. I have worked as the right hand, as the military attaché to President Robinson, as the military attaché to Baz Diopande, Patrick Manning, the right hand to Keith Rowley as commissioner, to Kamala Persad-Bissessar. I've worked with 5 of them, and not one of them have been on the take. I can put my head on a block. They may have persons just below that may do very questionable things. But the perception to believe that we have this godfather who has control, that is not the case. I have not seen it anywhere in the Caribbean. No, there's no person that has that type of power. What we have are politicians who are very weak, and they believe that by sleeping with the devil, you can get somewhere. And we have to influence politicians not to go down that road. That is my take on that whole matter. That I have not seen any leader in Trinidad and Tobago that has turned a blind eye to wrongdoing to try to get somewhere. What we need to do is to make sure that we stand firm, have the political will to do what is right. And sometimes there are persons just below them that may do something because of the lust for power.
Professor Griffith, you talk about the Duda situation. Isn't that and the situation in Haiti similar to what the clip refers to? And Mr. Slow, do you see an evolving, powerful group of people that have cover from those in authority emerging in Guyana? Let's look at Jamaica, Guyana, and Haiti to see if there is any value and relevance from what we heard from that clip.
I think, again, there is good news in that the circumstances portrayed in that clip, for me, are not region-wide circumstances. If you go back in time, you'll find reflections of that in the Bahamas back in the 80s. If you go back in time, you'll find episodic instances of that in Jamaica and in Trinidad and Tobago. But to say that it's a massive scale and politicians are on the take, there's a Godfather-like situation, I don't find that to be a portrait of the reality. Now, I also don't think that what he was talking about is akin to the Dudus affair. Yes, you had collusion by the posses in Tivoli Gardens and in other parts of Jamaica. And I have a map in this book showing where the various Tivoli Garden equivalences in Jamaica were. But you didn't have ministers of the government who were on the take. You had people who were providing the votes for the JLP or the PNP, and they would turn a blind eye. You had a government, both the JLP and PNP, providing contracts. But I don't think it's an approximation of what that gentleman was speaking about in that clip.
Yeah, I was saying that the Guyana situation is different, certainly, because I don't know of any one gang or several gangs can say that you have that type of influence. What we have in Guyana is allegation that the politicians themselves, the individual politicians, are corrupt. We have cases, for example, that's sometime last year when the United States Treasury Department sanctioned businessmen. They said that government officials, they were very specific, government officials, even though they only sanctioned one official, but they made it clear, government officials. And, you know, there are allegations of all forms of corruption. There is evidence, not only allegation, of evidence of government officials involved in corruption. And so, but I don't really think that we have reached that stage where we can honestly say that you have any gang or any who are so corrupt that they are beyond the law. We have people who, and this is one of the worrying things that I've been commenting on for the longest while. We have people with resources who have been providing gifts to the police. Perhaps it's unique in the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean. Businessman will provide cars, 10 cars to the police. Businessmen will provide arms, ammunition, and that type of thing. And then the question is, once they do that, what type of control or what type of immunity they would have bought with that type of benevolence, so to speak. And it is absolutely clear that once these people present these type of gifts to the institution and individuals in the institution, whether it's the police, whether it's government, then they buy immunity. No one touches them. And that is a worrying thing. And that, I think, in the context of Guyana, I think that is what is more worrying than any gang or sets of people, any gang, any formal gang, having so much influence as to be untouchable by the security forces or the law enforcement agencies.
If I could just 20 seconds on this, a very important point. We do not have, definitely in Trinidad and Tobago, the problem with gangs controlling politicians. However, there's something very important on this topic here, white-collar crime. In the last election campaign, both political parties put out over 20 million US in their campaign. And that 20 million US didn't come from any gang leader that in a three-quarter pants and slippers and a white vest. That came from contractors. So the contractors will get a 20 million US contract, and then the contract really cost about 2 million. They will now give you back a $10 million US check. Say, thank you very much for that contract when you were in government, but also remember me when you get back in government. These contractors in Trinidad and Tobago, they do not need to go to Las Vegas, where you have a 50% chance you're going to lose. You put 10 million US on both sides, and in the first month of whoever wins, you're going to get 5 times the returns. And then you're getting the returns without really any cost-benefit analysis or to justify whether it is they're providing what is required. That is a major concern. Because what it does, it means like probably 10% of our budget is based on corruption, mismanagement, escalation of budget allocation and tenders and so forth. And if you reduce that, you can minimize inflation, unemployment, cost of goods and services, and crime. So I think that is a major point as it pertains to who controls the politicians. Who controls the politicians are those same people who finance the politicians during an election.
Well, we have we have something similar where it is it is alleged, I have to use careful language, that we have lots and lots of contractors now. People who were once barbers, people who were once any ordinary person, now they get contracts to build roads and all that type of thing. And the allegation is that a percentage of that money, whatever it is, has to go to the politicians. And there is evidence of that. We have the famous case, I think Dennis knows about it, the pump station there, where a man got 800, almost $1 billion Guyana dollars to put up a pump station. A man who's closely aligned to the government. And on today, like today, right, they can't even get started with that. I think about a year or 2 years now running. We had a situation where some promoters came together and formed a company to build a school on the Linden-Suzaik Highway. The initial contract, I think, was something like about 347 million. They got an additional 120-something million. It is over a year since that project should have been ended, and it cannot be ended. They cannot complete the project up to now. So you have lots of that. You have lots and lots of that. You have to, even in the entertainment industry, you see these people fronting. They're going to bring in all these artists, sponsored by some ministry and individual companies and so on. And what happens is pay back and draw back. That is what goes on. And the evidence is there. So this is not just speculation. Contractors galore. We have contractors galore in Guyana. People who are office workers, never build a full coop. They get contract to build roads and contract to build housing schemes and all of that is there, and they have to give back. They have to give back. We have the situation. I have the record somewhere in the ministries. A man who is alleged to be aligned with us or associated with a particular minister. He's a relative of a particular minister. He has what they call a car detailing service, where they're cleaning government cars. And it will surprise you to know that when you look at the figures, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars Guyana money to detail a car, to wash a car, to change a battery, to change a tire. It is corruption. It is all corruption, and the evidence is there. And we call on the people in the Auditor General's chamber to audit these things. And even recently, when let me say this, almost every report that comes out from the international agencies and the U.S. departments dealing with corruption, they flag Guyana as having the police being corrupt, the judiciary being corrupt, government. They flag that. They flag that. And what happens? The government, through the Attorney General or someone else, will come and they will respond that is not true. They get the information from opposition elements and so. But we know those international reputable agencies are not going to take information from any one source and compile an annual report. The evidence is there, and they don't want to admit. They don't want. Gary, you perhaps can relate to this, because the government position up to about a year or so ago that when allegations of corruption were made, they must come with the evidence. Whoever is making the allegation must come with the evidence. I have been saying over and over that is not how it is done. As a law enforcement officer, we know that if the allegation is made and the allegation is credible, you must investigate to find the evidence. You can't expect and demand that whoever is making the allegation should bring forward the evidence, so that when the thing went south and the United States Department, I think it's the Treasury Department, issued those sanctions, they were no longer calling for that. They asked the U.S. to provide them with whatever evidence they have. But it was glaring. The corruption was there glaring. But they were turning a blind eye. They were doing like the proverbial ostrich and bury their head. But every single person, in these small societies, even though million a million population and 2 million population. Relatively small societies. People know what is going on. They know, the ordinary man know what is going on.
All right. So
on the business of contracts, I'll just mention one as a footnote. I've got a book coming out later this month on oil and climate change in Guyana. And I tell the story of a person who used to be a diplomat, used to be a politician, then became a diplomat, well, he was recalled, got a big contract to build roads. Guys knows nothing about building roads. Got a $50 million contract to build roads. One day you're a politician, next day you're a diplomat, next day you're a contractor.
And Professor, I'm sure you would have realized that is not an isolated case.
No, it's not.
Let's take a look at this other recording.
We don't see here as part of Trinidad. We see here as a sore, a diseased part that we wish would go away. I tell people, if your left kidney is cancerous and you ignore it, it will kill you. If you focus on the parts of your body that are healthy and you say, that left kidney is just a pain and a bother, you're going to die. And the nation is dying because we're treating a part of us as though it will go away and dry up one day.
You have to have social remediation programs to remediate some of the glaring inequalities in which people in the Caribbean live. Two things have to go hand in hand. It can't all be law enforcement and deterrence. It also has to do with an amelioration of the conditions under which many people in the Caribbean live, which essentially make them cold-hearted and brutal because they live in conditions that have no hope.
My question to Mr. Griffith and to all three of our guests, really, as we head down to program time, is against the background of here in Guyana, I suppose there are different labels across the Caribbean, where a group of people are now identifying themselves as quote-unquote scrapes or scrape heads, meaning people who are socio and economically disadvantaged in a society. What can be done by the country as a whole, not only the politicians, but the country as a whole, to rescue these people who are socio and economically disadvantaged, to bring them back into mainstream society with remedial education, business skills, you name it, to make them better people? Or should they just be left and with the time hope that evolve and perhaps pass on, and then we start afresh with a new generation?
Well, I think what happened there is exactly what caused the result of just a few days ago of the Trinidad and Tobago elections. 1/3 of the people who usually vote for the PNM in those same areas did not come out and vote. PNM usually gets 320,000 odd votes. They got 220,000 or 220,000 this time. 100 of the and mostly Afro-Trinidadians who are in those areas, they said they're not coming and vote, especially and that's in the corridor from Diego Martin all the way to Arima, inclusive of San Fernando, Point Fortin, and other places. They decided not to vote because they were fed up that they figured you all represent us and you have not provided for us for the last 10 years. The incoming government, they need to understand that you can't buy your way out of this by giving gang leaders big contracts and hope that it is going to filter down to the smallest, youngest person who's unemployed. They have to put a very stringent approach on fiscal policy by minimizing waste, corruption, inefficiency, mismanagement, incompetence. By doing that, you can take away almost 10% of your state budget expenditure and utilize those funds in the right manner, not by life support, not by the other things that may have been done in an incorrect manner under my administration, but by making sure that funds can be filtered down to the small man, because the young persons in the country, especially those who are unemployed, they are desperate. We have families in Trinidad and Tobago, as we've maybe seen that Trinidad and Tobago is a pretty wealthy country in relation to this part of the world. But there are so many persons who don't know where their next meal is coming from. They can't get money to get their kids to school. That massive tsunami that Kamal Persad-Bissessar did was the country said, look, we hope that you can fix us and make sure that I can get a meal the next day. She did policies and manifestos that hit the heart of the head. And by her doing that, there's a degree of hope that can cause persons who are suffering, who are in pain, in the hope that they can be transformed. And that is where that social development from education, health, sport, everything to try to build young persons, but it also involves giving them something. It must not be giving gangs money and hope it can filter down. It's not going to filter down. It'll just escalate the situation. So the only way it can be done is by proper fiscal management to reduce all of the wastage and corruption we have seen for the last decade, and utilizing those funds to make sure it can get right down to the poorest family, to the young man who needs something. He needs to help himself get educated, to get a trade, to be able to get something that he doesn't have to turn to gang activity.
I think any reliance solely on the government to ameliorate the circumstances will result in partial performance results. The government has got to be embracing the entire society, the private sector, the people who are beneficiaries of some of the investments, in Guyana's case in the oil, have got to be enjoined to be part of the embrace. Don't look only to the government. Many of the societies in which we find the destitution economically turning to deprivation socially is because there is a sense, and the word used by Gary Griffith, a loss of hope. People become fatalistic. They said that, look, not only am I not going to go vote, but I'm not going to do anything to invest in the future. Voting is only one indicator of the malaise. So I think you've got to see the embrace of those social programs. One of the harsh realities, and I point this out in this book, Jamaica has the highest per capita in the world of churches. Highest per capita churches, yet so much crime. So it's got to be who are responsible for changing the circumstances. It just can't be the government. The families have got to be involved. I used to use as a powerful explanation of the holistic approach. Back in the 80s, there was a powerful ad being run in regard to drug trafficking. Here is how the ad ran. A father didn't knock the son's door, goes into his son's room, sees his son smoking marijuana. He's so all upset. You can't be doing drugs in this house. When he calmed down, the son said, Dad, I'm doing marijuana because I saw you doing marijuana. This father did not realize that the son was observing his behavior. So it begins with how might the families, the home be part of this transformation of societies? How might the social sector, the services there in the various nonprofit organizations, the church has a role, the private sector has a role. So you've got to invest in all elements of the society, the possibilities of embracing to make a difference, education, social services, but getting jobs. But if you don't give people a sense of investment in their future, they will just practice the science of muddling through.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, when you and Dennis spoke about the people referring to themselves as scrape heads, to me, it speaks to a sign of hopelessness. They don't see any real future for themselves. And one would want to, perhaps the sociologists, to look at it and go right back to the concept of socialization. And to see whether those primary agencies of socialization, whether they're working, we're talking about the family. Professor Griffith referenced that a while ago. The schools, the churches, are they working to make sure that an individual in a society is properly socialized to avoid crime and criminal behavior? And again, in a Guyanese context, when people are there and they see and they know that the big ones, so to speak, are taking bribes and are involved in criminal activities, and they perceive, the scrapeheads perceive that that's the only way, or that's the only way you think you can do to move ahead, quite naturally they're going to try to move towards that. So it behoves the government and the other agencies to make sure that they address this situation so that it can redound to the benefit of all. I made the point some time ago on one of my programs. When you see 15-year-old and 16-year-old and teenagers are getting involved in robbery, violent robberies, and are shot and are killed, you just have to examine what would have led them to that. So if you don't do that, you're gonna it's just a conveyor belt, because you kill one today, more are gonna come up, because you're not addressing the fundamental issues as to what caused them to refer to themselves as scrapeheads and act in the manner that they are acting.
We have mentioned, and I think legitimately so, lots that's been going wrong or has gone wrong with police operations in Guyana and other places. But I think we ought to remind ourselves that not all the police people are bad guys. There are a lot of people who do good effort in the police forces, notwithstanding the limitations of funding and resources and the technology. So I just want to remind us and remind the viewers of this program that when we criticize legitimately things that are not being done or done properly by the police, avoid demonizing the entire force. There are lots of people who take serve and protect seriously, who come out doing good jobs and sometimes get criticized by some of the bad guys in the ranks who you think you're all that. There are a lot of good police forces, a lot of good police officers. We need to hold them high.
And I just like to add to that to say that policemen are products of the society that they serve.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Mr. Griffith, you wanted to say something to wrap up? Your last word?
No, I wish to thank all of you all. Professor Griffith, it's been a pleasure. Paul, see you soon, and hope make sure you have the lights ready when TKR decides to play in Guyana this year. I don't want no lights being blown. You want to win in style this time.
Right. That you call, we're talking about tactics and strategy after. Gary, we have the ball.
That's it for this episode of Caribbean Tea. We've unpacked a lot, from the surge in violent crimes and the scourge of illegal firearms to the urgent need for institutional reform and regional collaboration. Thanks to our guests, Paul Slow, Professor Ivelaw Griffith, and Gary Griffith, for their insights, honesty, and willingness to confront the uncomfortable truth shaping public safety in the Caribbean today. One thing is clear, it is this: the crime crisis isn't just about guns and gangs. It's about governance, it's about trust, and it's about whether our systems, from policing to politics, are strong enough to meet the challenge. The conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode, tag us, and let us know, what do you think it will take to turn the tide on crime in the Caribbean? If you found this discussion meaningful, please subscribe and share. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, and all major platforms. This is Caribbean Tea.